Keanu Reeves had never been the type of person to flaunt his fame. He preferred quiet mornings, slow walks, and keeping his life away from the flashing cameras and endless headlines. On that particular day, he found himself drawn to the sleek lines and roaring engines of a high-end car dealership. The sun was bright, bouncing off the polished floors and shiny chrome of Ferraris lined up like jewels waiting to be admired. Keanu moved slowly, almost absent-mindedly, enjoying the way the cars gleamed under the light. He wore his favorite simple clothes, a plain black jacket over a soft t-shirt and dark jeans. Around his neck he had a modest cross necklace, something he wore every day. It wasn't flashy or meant to attract attention. It was simply part of him. The dealership buzzed with energy. Salespeople moved quickly, greeting clients, checking schedules, and pointing out the features of various cars with practiced enthusiasm. Keanu stepped through the doors quietly, and immediately he noticed the scent of leather and the faint aroma of new car polish. A man behind a desk glanced up and saw him standing there, taking in the array of Ferraris. The man was tall, well-groomed, and confident, someone who knew he was in a place of luxury and power. He looked at Keanu and noticed the cross. A smirk appeared on his face. He thought he was seeing just another customer, someone who didn't belong in this world of speed and elegance. "Nice cross," the man said, voice casual but dripping with a hint of mockery. "Not really the kind of thing that goes with these cars, huh?" Keanu turned slightly, his eyes calm and steady, not giving much away. He didn't respond immediately. The man chuckled lightly, enjoying his own joke, assuming the figure in front of him was unaware of how out of place he seemed. Around them, a few other staff members noticed the interaction, but they were too busy to pay much attention. The energy of the dealership carried on as if nothing unusual was happening. Keanu's calm demeanor didn't make the man rethink his words. He leaned slightly forward, crossing his arms, and continued, "I mean, it's a nice accessory, sure, but really, do you think this matches the lifestyle here? You know, fast cars, flashy watches, and all that?" Still, Keanu said nothing. He simply looked at the nearest car, a red Ferrari that seemed almost alive with its curves and shine. He ran his fingers lightly over the smooth surface, appreciating the craftsmanship. There was no hurry in his movements, no sense of trying to impress anyone. To the casual observer, he might have seemed like a man genuinely interested in the car, not someone famous, not someone who could command headlines simply by stepping into the room. The man behind the desk leaned back slightly, satisfied with himself. He wasn't used to people ignoring his jokes. Most of the time they laughed, flattered by his attention. But there was something about this man, quiet, unassuming, grounded, that threw him off balance. Still, he persisted, unable to let go of the small sense of superiority he had felt at first. "Seriously, though," he added, almost to himself, "these cars, they're not for everyone. You have to really fit the image." Keanu finally looked up, meeting the man's gaze. His eyes were calm but held a quiet intensity. He didn't need to explain who he was or why he was there. There was something in his presence that suggested depth, someone who had lived a life beyond surface judgments. The man behind the desk felt a strange shift in the room, though he couldn't quite place it. There was no arrogance in Keanu's posture, no hint that he was expecting anything. He simply existed in the moment, observing, appreciating, quietly commanding attention without saying a word. Around them, other people moved through the showroom, looking at cars, discussing financing options, or planning test drives. No one seemed to notice the small, tense interaction at first, but slowly a few staff members began to glance over, sensing that something unusual was happening. There was a presence in the room that didn't fit the ordinary rhythm of business transactions and sales pitches. Keanu walked slowly toward a black Ferrari parked near the window. He crouched slightly to examine the details, running a hand over the leather interior and feeling the weight of the steering wheel. Every move was deliberate, unhurried, as if he were savoring a quiet moment of connection with the car. He didn't speak, didn't rush, and didn't seem at all concerned with who was watching. To him, this was simply another experience, another opportunity to appreciate something beautiful and well-crafted. The man behind the desk cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. He wasn't used to being ignored. "So, you're thinking about buying one?" he asked, forcing casualness into his tone. "Or just browsing?" Keanu finally spoke, his voice soft but steady. "I like to look at things I appreciate. Sometimes that's enough." The simplicity of his answer caught the man off guard. He had expected more, some eagerness, some excitement to match the flashy lifestyle he assumed Keanu represented. Instead, he was met with something entirely different: calmness, thoughtfulness, and a quiet dignity. The staff member felt a flicker of unease, realizing that this was not just an ordinary customer, and perhaps this quiet man deserved more respect than he had given. Keanu stood up straight again and continued walking through the showroom. His eyes took in every detail: the shine of the rims, the angles of the hoods, the craftsmanship of the interiors. He asked gentle questions about the cars, more out of curiosity than a desire to buy. He listened carefully to the answers, nodding, appreciating the effort of the sales staff without a hint of condescension or pretense. It was clear that he valued the experience itself rather than the status it might bring. Meanwhile, the man behind the desk felt an uncomfortable mix of admiration and embarrassment. He had assumed too quickly, mocked too lightly, and now realized that he had been speaking to someone whose life was far beyond the assumptions he had made. He opened his mouth to speak again, but no words seemed appropriate. Every joke he might make now felt small and unnecessary. Keanu moved toward a window looking out at the street where a few other cars were parked. He didn't rush, didn't demand attention, and didn't seek validation. He simply observed and existed in the space, quiet but fully present. There was a simplicity to his actions that made the entire dealership seem a little slower, a little more thoughtful, as if his calm had gently shifted the energy around him. As he walked back toward the main area, the staff began to notice subtle things: the quiet way he carried himself, the respectful way he treated the cars, the absence of any sense of entitlement. Even those who had never seen him on screen felt an unusual presence, a kind of serenity that was difficult to define but impossible to ignore. The man behind the desk finally found his voice again, but it was quieter now, less confident. Well, if you're interested, I can show you a few more models," he offered, almost hoping to regain some semblance of normalcy. Keanu nodded politely, following the gesture not with urgency but with curiosity. He didn't need the car, didn't need to impress anyone, but he was willing to engage in the experience, to explore the beauty of the vehicles without concern for anything else. Throughout the dealership, people continued their business, but the encounter had subtly changed the atmosphere. There was a sense of quiet reflection that lingered, the kind that comes when someone extraordinary walks into a space and affects it simply by being present. Keanu moved through the cars with a natural ease, his cross necklace resting lightly against his chest, a small symbol of his personal faith and grounding. By the time he reached the far end of the showroom, it was clear that the initial mockery had no power over him. He had remained calm, composed, and utterly unaffected. The man behind the desk, meanwhile, was left to wrestle with his assumptions and the unexpected reality of facing someone whose fame and character far exceeded the superficial judgments he had made in a few seconds. The quiet dignity of Keanu Reeves had shifted the room, leaving everyone who noticed with a subtle but undeniable sense of humility. The man behind the desk tried to recover some confidence, but there was a subtle unease in his voice. He had made a joke about the cross necklace earlier, thinking it would be playful, but now it hung awkwardly between them, a reminder of how quickly assumptions could go wrong. Keanu's quiet patience and calm gaze had already unsettled him, making him realize that humor at someone's expense could backfire in ways he hadn't expected. Around them, the cars glistened under the showroom lights, reflecting a reality where appearances often deceived more than they revealed. As Keanu moved to examine another Ferrari, the man could not help but comment again, though this time his words carried a hint of nervous curiosity. "I mean, this one is fast, but do you even care about that kind of thing?" he asked. "Or are you just looking?" Keanu smiled faintly, almost as if he were humoring the question, and replied, "I like to understand what I appreciate. Speed is interesting, but it's not the only part of a car that matters." The man paused, caught off guard by the thoughtful response. He expected a simple answer, a shallow acknowledgement of luxury and power, but Keanu's words held depth. They spoke of someone who saw value beyond surface impressions, someone who considered the whole of an experience rather than chasing the flashy parts that everyone else noticed first. It was an unusual kind of presence, the sort that shifted the energy in a room without a single dramatic gesture. A few other staff members began to glance their way, curious about the quiet interaction. They whispered to one another, unsure why their usually confident colleague seemed slightly on edge. The man's earlier laughter and casual mockery now felt out of place, replaced by a nervous awareness that he was dealing with someone extraordinary. Someone who did not rely on fame or attention to define himself. Keanu walked slowly toward a white Ferrari parked near the back. He crouched slightly, running his hand along the leather interior, noticing the stitching and the craftsmanship. He spoke softly, asking questions about the car's design, the balance of the engine, and the subtle engineering choices that made it unique. His words were simple but precise, showing a genuine curiosity rather than a desire to impress. Each answer the salesman gave seemed to require more effort than usual, and the man struggled to maintain his casual demeanor. He had underestimated the quiet intelligence and genuine presence in front of him. Most people just talk about horsepower and speed, Keanu said, his tone calm and neutral. But I want to know how it feels, how it responds to touch, to thought. That's what interests me. The man behind the desk swallowed, feeling a mix of embarrassment and awe. He realized that he had judged too quickly, thinking this man's appearance defined his understanding of the world. He had mocked a symbol that Keanu wore without knowing that the person before him carried more humility, thoughtfulness, and experience than he could ever guess. It was humbling in a quiet, internal way, the kind of humbling that leaves no dramatic scene, only reflection. Keanu then stood and turned toward a row of cars lined along the window. He observed the reflections in the glass, noticing the details of each vehicle. His calmness and focus created an almost meditative air, one that drew the attention of the few customers browsing nearby. Even those who had never seen him on screen felt a subtle pull of curiosity, sensing that there was something different about this quiet man, who seemed so absorbed in the simple act of observation. The man behind the desk tried to regain his footing, offering more facts about the cars, hoping to impress or perhaps to reassert some sense of control over the conversation. He spoke quickly, rattling off numbers, speeds, and features, hoping that the technical details would dominate the interaction. But Keanu listened patiently, nodding thoughtfully without interruption. He asked questions that were small but revealing, showing that he valued understanding over showmanship. Every answer led to another question, not from judgment but from genuine curiosity. The interaction became a quiet dialogue rather than a sales pitch, subtle but engaging, and impossible for anyone present to ignore. A colleague who had been helping another customer finally realized who Keanu really was. His eyes widened slightly as he approached the main area, trying to confirm what he was seeing. He leaned closer to the man behind the desk and whispered the name under his breath. The revelation hit slowly, like a sudden gust of wind, but it immediately changed the mood. The dealer's casual smirk vanished, replaced by a flush of embarrassment and awe. He had mocked someone famous without realizing it, and the quiet dignity with which Keanu carried himself only made the moment sharper. Keanu continued moving through the showroom, stopping at a sleek silver model near the entrance. He ran his hand along the hood, feeling the cold metal, the smooth curvature, and the subtle lines that spoke of precision engineering. He asked about the balance of the tires, the responsiveness of the brakes, and the feel of the engine under pressure. Each question was simple, yet it revealed his deep appreciation for detail and his respect for the craft involved. It was clear that he saw more than just the outward glamour. He valued effort, skill, and the story behind every object. The staff gathered discreetly, whispering among themselves. There was a sense of quiet excitement, the kind that comes when someone remarkable walks into a room, not shouting or demanding attention, but simply existing in a way that commands notice. The dealer who had mocked the cross felt a wave of self-awareness, realizing how quickly arrogance can blind a person to truth. He had made a mistake, and it was uncomfortably obvious. He wished he could take back the earlier words, yet he also knew that Keanu's response, calm, silent, and composed, had already made the point in the most elegant way possible. Keanu then walked toward a darker corner of the showroom, where a limited edition model sat quietly. The car had an understated elegance, something that didn't shout for attention, but demanded it through subtle presence. Keanu crouched, examining every angle, and asked gently about the inspiration behind the design. The man behind the desk answered, trying to match Keanu's calm, thoughtful tone, but he found it difficult. There was no room for jokes or casual mockery now. Everything had to be precise, respectful, and true. The quiet humility in Keanu's voice and manner made the salesman painfully aware of his earlier misjudgment. At one point, Keanu glanced at the staff members, his gaze soft and inclusive. acknowledging their presence without any sense of superiority. It was a small gesture, but it carried a quiet weight, a reminder that dignity and respect can change the dynamics of any room. The staff, previously accustomed to high-pressure sales and competitive energy, felt a subtle shift in perspective. There was more to the experience than selling a car. There was a lesson in patience, humility, and the quiet power of presence. The man behind the desk cleared his throat again, hesitant this time, as if measuring each word before speaking. If you'd like, we could take one for a short drive," he offered. There was an almost apologetic tone, a recognition that he had been wrong to judge so quickly. Keanu nodded politely, expressing interest without urgency, showing that his intentions were genuine, not performative. He was there to experience, to appreciate, not to impress or dominate. Keanu walked slowly to the car, opening the door with careful hands, sitting inside with the same calm demeanor that had defined the entire encounter. He ran his fingers across the dashboard, feeling the quality and care put into every detail. His movements were deliberate, respectful, and entirely human, conveying an appreciation that was simple yet profound. There was no sense of entitlement or impatience, only a deep engagement with the moment. Outside the window, the sun continued to shine, casting reflections on the cars and creating a warm, almost peaceful atmosphere. The quiet hum of conversation in the dealership faded slightly in the presence of Keanu's calmness. The man behind the desk watched, feeling both admiration and discomfort, realizing that he had underestimated the power of humility and quiet presence. Keanu's demeanor was a lesson without words. Strength and influence do not always need to be loud or showy. As Keanu prepared to step out for the brief drive, he glanced back, giving a small polite nod to the dealer and staff. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried an unspoken message: recognition, respect, and the acknowledgement of shared humanity. The man behind the desk felt a mix of relief and regret, wishing he had approached the interaction with the same calm and respect that Keanu had shown from the beginning. Even after the drive, when Keanu returned to the showroom, the energy had subtly changed. Staff moved with quieter awareness, conversations were softer, and a sense of reflection lingered. The encounter, though brief and seemingly ordinary, had left an indelible mark on everyone present. It was a reminder that assumptions can be dangerous, that humility carries quiet power, and that the way we treat others can leave lasting impressions far beyond the moment. Keanu Reeves, with his simple cross around his neck and unassuming presence, had transformed an ordinary visit to a dealership into a subtle, unforgettable lesson in grace, patience, and human connection. The realization came slowly, creeping into the back of the dealer's mind like a shadow that grew larger with every passing second. He had been mocking the cross around Keanu Reeves's neck, thinking he was just another quiet, unassuming customer, someone who could be teased without consequence. He hadn't noticed the way people had begun to glance their way, sensing the unusual calm and dignity Keanu carried. It was subtle at first, but then it became undeniable. This was no ordinary man. He had underestimated the presence, the quiet power that radiated without arrogance or spectacle. A colleague, who had been helping another customer near the far end of the showroom, finally recognized Keanu and whispered the name under his breath. The words drifted through the space like a small breeze before settling heavily in the dealer's chest. His eyes widened, his confident posture faltered, and a wave of embarrassment washed over him. He had made a careless joke, a passing remark that now seemed shallow and thoughtless. The words he had spoken hung in the air, more awkward and misplaced with every heartbeat. He realized he had been mocking one of the most respected and quietly influential actors in the world without knowing it. Keanu remained calm, unaware of the internal storm brewing behind the desk. He continued moving through the showroom, examining a deep blue Ferrari with careful hands, appreciating the smooth curves and the subtle details that spoke of craftsmanship and precision. He asked questions, gentle and thoughtful, about the way the car handled on the road, the balance of the engine, and the feeling of the steering wheel under different speeds. His words were simple, but each one carried a depth of understanding that made the staff around him listen more closely than they ever had before. The dealer swallowed, his earlier bravado gone, replaced by a mix of awe and guilt. He had assumed too quickly, mocking a symbol he barely understood and a person he barely knew. The quiet humility of Keanu's presence made him painfully aware of his own mistake. Every movement, every question, every glance that Keanu offered spoke of someone who had lived a full life, someone who appreciated the details and subtleties that others often overlooked. It was impossible to keep up the facade of superiority in the face of such composed grace. Keanu moved to a silver car parked near the corner, kneeling slightly to run his hand over the dashboard, feeling the texture of the leather and the precision of the stitching. He asked about the thought behind the placement of each feature, the logic that guided the design, and the care that went into crafting something meant to inspire. The dealer, trying to respond, felt his words falter. He had prepared numbers, statistics, and sales pitches, but they all felt small, inadequate, compared to the quiet intelligence of the man in front of him. Keanu wasn't impressed by facts alone. He wanted understanding, experience, and insight. A few staff members gathered closer, whispering softly among themselves. They could feel the shift in energy, the subtle tension between the calm composure of Keanu and the uneasy realization of the dealer. Even those who had never seen Keanu's films could sense the gravity of the moment. The room, once filled with confident chatter and hurried movement, seemed to pause, holding its breath as if waiting for something significant to unfold. The dealer cleared his throat, attempting to regain some control over the situation. "If you'd like, we could take one for a short drive," he offered, the words coming out quieter than intended, almost apologetic. Keanu nodded politely, showing genuine interest without urgency or expectation. There was no pretense, no desire to dominate or impress. He simply wanted to engage, to experience, to appreciate. The gesture, simple as it was, carried a weight that reminded everyone in the room of the power of presence and humility. Keanu approached the car, opening the door with careful hands and settling into the seat with ease. He ran his fingers across the steering wheel, feeling the quality and precision, noticing the subtle details that made the experience unique. The dealer watched, a mixture of fascination and self-reproach gnawing at him. He realized he had judged too quickly, made assumptions based on appearances, and failed to see the humanity and depth in someone he thought he could easily categorize. As Keanu prepared for the brief drive, he looked back, giving a small nod to the dealer and the staff. It was a simple gesture, polite and understated, yet it carried an unspoken message: acknowledgement, respect, and a quiet reminder of shared humanity. The dealer felt a shiver of humility run through him, understanding that he had been given a lesson in the most subtle and profound way imaginable. Keanu's calm had turned an ordinary interaction into a mirror reflecting the dealer's own assumptions and flaws. The drive itself was quiet, thoughtful, and deliberate. Keanu paid attention to every detail, noticing how the car responded to different turns, how the engine felt under acceleration, and the balance of the steering. His focus was not on speed or showmanship, but on understanding, appreciating, and connecting with the experience. It was a reminder that true engagement with the world comes not from flaunting knowledge or power, but from careful observation and respect for what exists. Meanwhile, back in the showroom, the dealer reflected on his earlier actions. He thought about the careless words, the hasty judgment, and the fleeting sense of superiority he had allowed to guide him. He felt a growing respect for Keanu, not just for his fame, but for his quiet humility and the dignity with which he carried himself. The lesson was subtle but profound. Appearances deceive, assumptions mislead, and patience and understanding reveal truths that arrogance can never grasp. When Keanu returned from the drive, he stepped out of the car slowly, taking a moment to observe the room again. The staff, who had been caught in the quiet gravity of the encounter, now moved with more awareness, their conversations softer, their attention more focused. The atmosphere had shifted, transformed by someone who had walked in without fanfare and left a mark simply through presence, patience, and respect. Keanu walked to another car, a black Ferrari with understated elegance. He examined it closely, noting the subtle curves, the careful alignment of the panels, and the precision in the smallest details. He asked questions again, not to challenge or show knowledge, but to learn, to connect, and to appreciate. Every question was thoughtful, every gesture deliberate, and every interaction infused with a quiet dignity that made the dealer more aware of his own behavior and assumptions. The dealer approached, hesitant but compelled by the need to make amends, to show some acknowledgement of the oversight earlier. I didn't mean to. I spoke too quickly," he admitted quietly, not as a dramatic apology but as a sincere acknowledgement of the misstep. Keanu looked up, his calm eyes meeting the dealer's with understanding but without a hint of judgment. His presence made the apology feel complete, unnecessary, yet respected. It was a moment of quiet reconciliation, a subtle acknowledgement of humanity that carried more weight than any loud words or grand gestures could. As Keanu continued moving through the showroom, examining cars with careful hands and asking thoughtful questions, the staff felt a mix of admiration and reflection. They realized that fame, humility, and respect could coexist in ways that were far more powerful than any display of wealth or status. The dealer, in particular, felt a deep awareness of his own assumptions and the subtle arrogance that had led him to mock a man he barely knew. The experience was humbling, enlightening, and transformative all at once. By the time Keanu left the dealership, the atmosphere had changed completely. Conversations were quieter, movements more deliberate, and the staff carried a sense of reflection and awareness that lingered. The encounter had been brief, but the lessons were lasting. Never judge by appearances, treat every person with respect, and recognize that quiet strength often surpasses loud confidence. Keanu Reeves, with his simple cross around his neck and his calm, grounded presence, had turned an ordinary visit into a subtle but unforgettable lesson in humility, understanding, and the power of human dignity. The dealer felt a weight on his shoulders that he had never experienced before. He had mocked a simple necklace, a symbol that he didn't understand, and now he realized that he had been speaking to someone extraordinary without even knowing it. Keanu Reeves stood in the middle of the showroom, calm, composed, and unaffected by the earlier mockery. There was no anger, no arrogance, just a quiet presence that seemed to fill the entire space. The staff and customers alike noticed the change in atmosphere, as if the air had grown heavier with reflection and awareness. Keanu approached a red Ferrari parked near the window, bending slightly to appreciate the details of the leather seats and the dashboard. His movements were gentle, deliberate, and full of thought, showing that he cared deeply about the experience rather than the appearance of it. The dealer, watching from behind his desk, felt his pride diminish with every passing moment. He had expected a celebrity to demand attention, to assert their presence, but Keanu needed nothing from anyone except to engage with the moment and the people around him. Most people look at the outside, the shine, the engine, Keanu said softly, almost to himself but loud enough for the dealer to hear. I like to understand what goes into it. The care, the thought, the effort, that is what matters. The words struck the dealer harder than any rebuke could have. He realized that he had focused on appearances too quickly, ignoring the value of substance and integrity. Keanu's statement wasn't a lecture or a criticism. It was a gentle reminder of what truly matters. The dealer felt a deep sense of regret for his earlier mockery, understanding that it had been not only disrespectful but shallow and hasty. Keanu then turned toward a group of staff standing nearby. He gave a small, acknowledging smile, a gesture of recognition that did not demand anything in return. It was simple but powerful. Each person felt seen, respected, and valued in a way that was subtle, yet deeply impactful. The dealer, in particular, felt the weight of his earlier words, realizing that true influence comes from humility, patience, and presence, not from jokes or assumptions. Can you tell me about the engineering here? Keanu asked, moving toward a silver Ferrari that seemed to glimmer in the sunlight. I want to understand why each choice was made, the intention behind every detail. The dealer hesitated, trying to respond with precise facts and figures. But Keanu wasn't asking for numbers. He was asking for understanding, for the story behind the craftsmanship. The dealer felt a sudden nervousness, realizing that he had been relying on assumptions rather than genuine communication. He began to answer more carefully, speaking with honesty and thoughtfulness, hoping to convey the care and effort that had gone into creating each car. Keanu listened intently, nodding occasionally, his eyes calm and focused. There was no rush, no impatience, only genuine interest. The dealer found himself explaining details he had never bothered to share before, discovering that the questions encouraged deeper reflection on his own work. It was as if Keanu's quiet presence was pulling the truth from him, revealing both the beauty of the cars and the humility of the people who built and sold them. Around them, the other staff members watched in silence. They could feel the shift, the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to speak loudly to be respected. Keanu's humility had changed the entire room. making even the most confident employees reflect on their own behavior and approach. It was a lesson in grace that required no drama, only awareness and quiet attention. The dealer finally spoke, his voice softer than usual. I didn't think about it that way before. I guess I focused on the wrong things. He paused, looking directly at Keanu, who gave a small understanding nod. There was no need for drama, no need for anger. The lesson had already been made clear. Humility and patience had conveyed more than any words could have. Keanu moved toward a dark blue Ferrari, kneeling slightly to examine the stitching in the leather seats and the arrangement of the controls. It's remarkable, he said quietly. Not because it looks good, but because someone put thought and care into it. That is always what matters to me. The dealer felt a mixture of admiration and embarrassment. He had mocked someone he did not understand, and now he was learning what it meant to truly observe, to truly appreciate, without judgment. The quiet wisdom in Keanu's words, the calm presence he maintained, and the respect he showed to everyone and everything around him created an invisible force that humbled everyone in the room. Keanu then turned to the dealer and spoke softly but clearly. We all make assumptions, he said. It's human, but it's important to recognize them and learn from them. The dealer nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. He understood the message, the gentle correction, and the unspoken expectation to carry himself differently. He had been given a lesson in humility that was both direct and subtle, powerful because it required reflection rather than confrontation. Keanu's approach made the lesson personal, human, and unforgettable. The actor continued to move through the showroom, taking his time, asking questions about the balance of the cars, the inspiration behind each design, and the stories of the engineers and craftsmen who had created them. Each question was simple, but it revealed a depth of understanding and appreciation that went far beyond the superficial. The dealer realized that he had underestimated the quiet strength of presence, the way a person could command respect without demanding it. Keanu's actions were deliberate but gentle. He didn't seek to embarrass anyone, didn't flaunt his fame, and didn't insist on recognition. Instead, he moved through the space with a focus on learning and understanding, giving those around him an example of humility, patience, and respect. The dealer found himself reflecting on his behavior, realizing that the lesson was not just about appearances or mistakes, but about the way one treated others and engaged with the world. As Keanu prepared to leave the showroom, he gave a small, acknowledging nod to the staff and dealer. It was quiet, unassuming, but it carried weight. Everyone in the room felt the significance, the subtle but undeniable impact of someone who lived with integrity and humility. The dealer felt a renewed sense of awareness, understanding that the way he interacted with people could leave lasting impressions far more powerful than any sales pitch or joke. Keanu stepped outside briefly, taking in the sunlight and the reflections on the cars. He seemed completely at ease, grounded in a presence that required nothing from anyone else, yet gave something profound to everyone who witnessed it. The dealer watched, feeling a mix of awe and humility. He realized that the encounter had changed him, not because of fame or spectacle, but because of quiet dignity, calm reflection, and genuine engagement. Even after Keanu left the dealership, the atmosphere remained altered. Conversations were softer, movements more deliberate, and the sense of reflection lingered. The dealer found himself replaying the interaction, thinking about assumptions, humility, and the power of presence. He understood that mocking someone, even lightly, could carry unforeseen consequences, and that genuine respect and observation had a far deeper impact. Keanu's visit had been brief, but the lessons were lasting. The dealership, once filled with casual chatter and confident arrogance, now carried a subtle air of reflection and awareness. Staff members moved with more thoughtfulness, their interactions more intentional, and the dealer himself carried a quiet sense of understanding and respect. The experience had demonstrated the quiet power of humility, the importance of treating everyone with dignity, and the enduring impact of human presence. In the days that followed, the dealer found himself thinking about that visit often. He recalled the calm, deliberate way Keanu had moved through the showroom, the gentle questions, the quiet nods, and the unspoken lessons about patience, humility, and understanding. It became a personal reminder that true respect and awareness were far more important than quick judgments or shallow impressions. Keanu Reeves, with his simple cross around his neck and his quiet, Grounded presence had turned an ordinary day into a profound lesson in human connection, leaving an impression that would stay with the dealer and staff long after the showroom lights dimmed. The dealership returned to its normal rhythm after Keanu Reeves left. Yet something remained altered in the air. The usual energy of quick conversations, loud voices, and constant movement had been replaced by a subtle sense of reflection. Staff members moved with more thoughtfulness, speaking to customers with increased patience, and even the dealer behind the desk carried a quieter, more measured demeanor. The encounter had left a mark that was invisible yet unmistakable, a lesson in humility and awareness that could not be undone. The dealer thought back to the first moment he had noticed the cross around Keanu's neck. At the time, he had mocked it lightly, assuming it was a small accessory belonging to an ordinary man. He had not considered the meaning it might hold, nor had he imagined the depth of character of the person before him. That careless comment, once intended as humor, now seemed like a misstep he could never forget. The humility and patience Keanu had displayed in response had turned the incident into a profound lesson about judgment, respect, and the quiet power of dignity. Keanu's calmness had been the most striking part. At no point had he shown irritation, anger, or even the slightest hint of arrogance. He had moved through the showroom with deliberate curiosity, taking time to appreciate the cars, asking thoughtful questions, and observing the details that often went unnoticed. His presence had shifted the energy in the room, not with drama or spectacle, but with quiet awareness and genuine engagement. Every action, every word, had left the staff and the dealer reconsidering their own behavior. The dealer reflected on the interaction repeatedly in the days that followed. He thought about the assumptions he had made, the words he had spoken too quickly, and the humility he had witnessed. He realized that appearances were often misleading, and that true strength did not come from mockery or bravado, but from understanding and presence. The lesson was subtle but profound. Treat everyone with respect, observe carefully, and never underestimate the quiet dignity of a person who carries themselves with integrity. Customers who had witnessed Keanu's visit also talked about it quietly among themselves. They remarked on how grounded he seemed, how approachable despite his fame, and how he engaged with the cars and the staff with genuine interest rather than self-importance. Even those who had never seen his films felt that his presence carried a lesson in humility and humanity. The story of his visit began to spread softly through the dealership and beyond, not as gossip, but as an example of how fame and respect could coexist with simplicity and kindness. The staff began to reflect on their own work and behavior. They realized that treating customers with patience and respect, listening carefully, and valuing the details of their work could create experiences far more meaningful than the usual rush of sales and competition. The encounter had subtly taught them the importance of presence, mindfulness, and human connection. Keanu's quiet way of engaging with the world had left a lasting impression, one that went beyond cars, numbers, or superficial appearances. The dealer, in particular, carried a personal reminder of the encounter. He began to approach every customer with a new perspective, taking the time to observe, listen, and engage without judgment. He reflected on the importance of humility, the power of quiet confidence, and the impact of treating others with dignity. Every time he caught himself making assumptions or rushing through interactions, he remembered the calm, deliberate presence of Keanu Reeves and adjusted his approach accordingly. In the dealership, the cars remained the same, their engines powerful, their exteriors gleaming, and their interiors meticulously crafted. Yet the way people engaged with them had changed. Staff approached their work with more care, and customers responded to the new energy with appreciation and warmth. The visit had created a ripple effect, spreading awareness and consideration through actions rather than words, showing that meaningful influence often comes through example rather than instruction. Keanu's visit also reminded everyone of the quiet dignity that exists in everyday life. His simple cross necklace, once mocked, now symbolized integrity, faith, and grounding. The lesson was clear. Small details matter, assumptions can mislead, and respect is earned not by flaunting status but by embodying character. The dealership, once a place of noise and quick judgment, had become a space of reflection, respect, and awareness, all because of one person's grounded presence. The dealer often thought back to the moment when he had realized who Keanu was. The shock and embarrassment had been fleeting, but the reflection that followed had been lasting. He understood that humility was not weakness, patience was not passivity, and quiet presence could be more influential than any display of wealth or power. The lesson had been delivered without confrontation, without drama, and without a single raised voice, yet its impact was profound and enduring. Months later, the dealer would still recall the visit vividly. He would think about the careful way Keanu examined each car, the thoughtful questions he asked, and the respect he showed to every staff member. He would remember the quiet nods, the calm gestures, and the simple smile that acknowledged humanity, without expecting anything in return. These memories became a guide, a reminder to approach life with humility, curiosity, and consideration for others, even beyond the dealership. The story of Keanu Reeves's visit circulated quietly among friends and colleagues, not as celebrity gossip, but as an example of human dignity and grounded presence. People spoke about the encounter with admiration, noting how someone could carry fame and recognition without arrogance, how one could engage deeply with the world while remaining humble and approachable. The story inspired reflection, encouraging others to consider their own behavior, assumptions, and ways of interacting with those around them. For the dealer and the staff, the lesson was clear. Life is not measured by appearances, status, or loud declarations, but by the quiet impact we have on others. Respect, patience, and genuine engagement create lasting impressions far beyond any moment of mockery or judgment. Keanu Reeves had demonstrated this through simple human actions, leaving an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed him. The dealership had become a space of reflection, humility, and awareness, reminding everyone that the smallest gestures often carry the greatest significance. As the days continued, the staff carried forward the lessons learned, applying them to each interaction, each conversation, and each moment of engagement with customers. They approached their work with renewed care, mindful of the power of presence and the importance of treating each person with dignity. The dealer himself felt transformed, carrying a sense of awareness and humility that influenced both his professional and personal life. The visit had changed not just the way he approached his work, but the way he approached the world. Keanu Reeves, in his quiet and unassuming way, had turned a simple visit to a car dealership into a lasting lesson in human connection, patience, and respect. His presence reminded everyone that assumptions are dangerous, that humility carries quiet power, and that the way we treat others leaves lasting impressions. The simple cross around his neck, once the subject of a mocking comment, became a symbol of grounding, integrity, and the quiet strength of character. The dealership returned to its usual business, yet the memory of the visit lingered, shaping interactions and influencing attitudes. Customers experienced a different level of engagement, staff approached their work with care, and the dealer himself carried a personal awareness that had been sparked by one simple, human encounter. It was a reminder that true influence comes not from spectacle, fame, or status, but from the way we live, the respect we show, and the humanity we embody. In the end, the visit by Keanu Reeves became more than a moment in a car dealership. It became a story of quiet transformation, a lesson in humility, and a reflection on human connection. The impact was lasting because it was genuine, simple, and human-centered. It reminded everyone present that kindness, patience, and respect are the foundations of meaningful interaction, and that true presence leaves a mark that endures far longer than words or assumptions ever could. The story of that day remained with the dealer and staff, a guiding example of dignity, grace, and the power of quiet humanity.